Okay, so a lot of the information that I have in the PowerPoint is coming from like the Vanderbilt education website, so all of those things you can go online and find afterwards if you want to. And a lot of this is things that I went through in my teacher prep program, and a lot of it is useful information to know, but I will tell you that until you're using it, it kind of feels like it's information that's like floating there in your head. So we're going to try together to make it practical. If you're in this room, it means that you've volunteered in a program before, I think. Has anyone not volunteered yet? You haven't volunteered yet? Have you worked with a student before?
Yeah, not here, no.
Okay, so I guess as we're going through, think of students that you've worked with before and relate the information back to those experiences that you've had. You can also think of yourself as a learner or learners that you've encountered in the past. I know as I was planning this, I was thinking about myself as a learner and some of the things I'm thankful for, some of the times when I realized I probably wasn't the type of learner that I wanted to be, and then the reasons why I learn in the ways that I learn. And so we'll get into that a little bit more, and there'll be times for you to think about yourself and then think about those kids that you've worked with before. But we are going to start talking about intrinsic motivations. There are two different kinds of motivation we'll talk about, intrinsic and extrinsic. And we're starting with what I think of as the good one, intrinsic. Some of you might already kind of know what this means, but again, think of it through this new lens with your students. Someone that is intrinsically motivated is fascinated with the subject. There's a sense of relevance to their life and their world. And there's some type of accomplishment that will come in mastering it, or a sense of calling to it. So I think of the things that I naturally went towards my entire life. I like learning about learning. I like learning about psychology. Those are the things that I can like dive into, read forever, and it feels good to me. No one has to tell me to do it. I'm going to do it on my own. And students who are intrinsically motivated, or students who are saying things like, oh, I love math. Oh, can we read a new book? Like, oh my goodness, I want to solve another problem. I don't want to be done yet. Those are just some things that I've heard. I know in myself, it's like when I'm sitting in the office and I have a big to-do list of things that are boring to me, and instead I am like, I just really want to read more about like, I really want to read the A+ schools report and see like how King did this year. When like I don't really need to know that right now, but that's what I want to be digging into and learning. And so I'm saying those things in my head, like, oh, this is what I want to be doing. Has anyone heard students say things like this when you're working with them? Like a student that's highly motivated and you've heard something? Yeah. What are some other examples of things that they might say? Because these are kind of cheesy examples. Not often is a kid like, I love math. Anyone think of anything? Yeah.
I had a student that the only way I could really connect to him was through football.
Mm-hmm.
So I tailored a lot of my lessons towards football.
Mm-hmm.
And even at times just learning about football, but figuring out a game using football and use his sight words that he should know. So it kind of helped.
Yeah.
For our connection, because he was a little child that did not want to trust other people. So there were a couple of levels that were going on there.
Mm-hmm. So it's important the first few times that you meet a student to be listening to their language. What are they already motivated to learn about? Because it might not be math and it might not be reading. It might be, and if it is, then that's great and you want to just continue to cultivate that. But figure out the things that they are intrinsically motivated towards. Because there are learners that like lean in one direction or another in the classroom environment, but ultimately we all in some ways are intrinsically motivated and we all in some ways are extrinsically motivated. So extrinsic motivators might include parental expectations, expectations of trusted role models, earning potential of a course of study, and grades. This is like all of schooling in a lot of ways. Students who are extrinsically motivated might say things like, I just need to get 2 right to get that piece of candy. If I mess up, Miss Audrey is going to be mad at me. I would not be mad at them. But they might think that. We get to go to the class party if we get an A. So anything that is motivating them that isn't, I just want to learn this for the sake of learning it. So a lot of our kids might be feeling this way, and we might set kids up to feel this way. A lot of us are motivated in this way when we do certain types of learning. Like, my hope today is that you're intrinsically motivated. You want to learn this because you know that it's going to be practical for the work that you're going to be doing for the kingdom. If I were telling you, like, you all have to be here or you can't go into the classroom, we won't let you go in the classroom unless you're here in this training, then that might make it so that you're coming into this training extrinsically motivated. You don't really care about what you're learning. You're here because you think you have to be, or you think that, you're not going to get the reward unless you show up. And so a lot of our kids, most of the kids that you guys will be working with are little, so they might not think about grades so much yet, or they might, depending on what's happening in their home. But they might be motivated because they don't want to get a bad grade. And so they're doing this because they want to get a good grade. Or they're motivated because you are giving them a piece of candy. And right now that's their motivation, is they want that piece of candy. They don't really care if they know 2 + 2. They want the Jolly Rancher though. And so they're going to put in the work to get the Jolly Rancher. It might even be that, like, they know that they're going to have more time to play if they do this quickly. And these things aren't always bad, so I don't want you to think that they're always bad, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But they're not necessarily always good either, and there's something that we should at least be aware of when you're working with a child, trying to evaluate what is currently motivating them. So intrinsic motivation, one of the advantages, it's obvious to me, is that it's a little more long-lasting and self-sustaining. When you're learning something because you want to learn it, you're going to retain more of the information. Efforts to build this kind of motivation are typically efforts at promoting student learning. Such efforts often focus on the subject rather than rewards or punishment. So I think of intrinsic motivation as a characteristic of lifelong learners. I think of students that are going to learn with us, and then they're going to go home with their homework and try to do what we taught them so that they can teach themselves also. And they're going to go into their classroom next year not having you with them, but remembering that, oh, if I put in practice, if I do this a few times, I'm going to get it and I'm going to learn it. This is a quality of someone that learns all the way through life. Has anyone, like, in their own life seen themselves as like a long-time learner, or been in a place where they realized they weren't necessarily continuing to learn? I reflect on this a lot. Has anyone else thought of this in the context of their own life? Yeah, do you want to share, Tyler?
I think oftentimes I'll find something that, like, I just feel really, I don't have the tools, I feel incapable of something, and then it motivates me, like, well, I want to figure it out, and then you crack it after a little bit of effort, and it feels really great. And showing kids, like, who are mostly incompetent in everything they do, they're constantly learning new things. But as adults, you get to a point where you have competence and you forget what it's like to fail and then to overcome and learn. And so teaching kids those skills to motivate themselves, that's what will benefit them into adulthood. And that was one that I struggled with as a kid, because I felt like most of my motivations were extrinsic, weren't coming from me, were coming from incentives from my parents or from pizza party, whatever it would be. So I can definitely see the advantage of teaching these kids the thing that's going to follow them into adulthood in life.
Right. That's exactly where my thinking goes too. I will say that I have been an intrinsic learner my whole life. I mean, I was little and I was lucky enough to have my mom staying at home, and she would set up like centers around our house, and it was fun for me to like go to the centers, and the centers were classroom centers. I was like doing probably not even exciting math, like math worksheets, and it was fun for me. But that's the kind of learners that we want our students to be, and maybe it's not doing a math worksheet, but we want them to want to be in school because they know it's benefiting them. We want them to make it to high school and want to better themselves or want to push into their passions. And like you said, and even as an adult, when you have something in front of you and you don't know how to do it, not shutting down, but saying, okay, I can learn this because it's going to benefit me to learn it. I'm going to put the time and energy into learning it. Because the reality is, in our adult world, outside of work, and sometimes even within work, we don't have extrinsic motivation. We don't have someone sitting there giving us a piece of candy when we finish a task list. So we want to set our kids up for success. Yeah, we want them to learn math, and you can get a student to learn 2 + 2 with candy, but we want them to be able to then, when they don't have urban impact at their school with them, be able to learn 2 × 2. And a lot of that is if they're motivated to do it, how much time and energy are they going to put into it? And so these are things that we need to think about. But the disadvantages, which to me aren't really disadvantages, they're just what you have to do to make this happen, is put in time and effort. You do have to be thinking about it. Your mind can't be blank while you're sitting across from a student and you're just going through the routine. You've done the math drills 20 times, so you know how to do it, so you don't have to think you're thinking about your own job while you're going through the math drill with the student. No, you need to have your mind ready and watching them. How are they responding? Why are they doing the math drill right now? Are they doing it because you've made it interesting for them and they want to be doing it? Or are they doing it because you have been giving them candy and they just want the candy? So you need to be active. You need to be looking at the student. You need to be changing your language or changing your actions to get them to this place. I was kind of laughing also as I was prepping this because I felt like I didn't maybe put in the full amount of time that I would want to fully prepare. Mostly prepared, but in order to get people motivated, you do have to prepare your lesson. You have to think about it before. You have to know when the moments are going to come up in the lesson where it might be a little more challenging to get the student motivated and think through how you're going to handle that. And these are things that you'll get better at too as the semester goes on. Once you're more familiar with the lesson in front of you, it gets easier to change the lesson and you naturally become more prepared. So these are just things to go in on that first day thinking about, but really to revisit as you get familiar with the program that you're in and the student that's across from you. Does anyone else have any comments on intrinsic learning that they're wanting to share? Yeah.
So I just have one thought on, so I think there's a gap in kind of creating or recognizing the value of knowledge and wisdom, you know, and especially in, you know, in the situations that we're dealing with. And so I think if you can connect what you're trying to teach to something that creates value in their lives, then you know, then there's a motivation there to get people to learn. And so I don't know. That's one thing I try to do is just, you know, why are you learning this math so that tomorrow you can go do something useful and be, you know, be in a better spot.
Yeah, that's huge, and we're going to touch on some of the more practical ways to do this too, but that is a huge one, making it relevant to them, making what you're learning. Yeah.
I also think validating focused questions. You know, if they ask they ask a question about, you know, we can choose which questions we're really answering and focusing on with this student. If we're listening and they ask a question that can lead them to an answer in math or reading, and then even though we might go on a rabbit trail with that question, I think just the fact that they're being validated in something that they're saying and it has to do with the subject.
Right. And that is an important concept. There are people who I've watched, tutors who go down a rabbit hole, and there are ways to validate a student and what they say and what they're curious about and still keep them on task. And there are ways to, like, it's not appropriate to fully ignore a question, and it's not always appropriate to dive into it so deeply with them. And so if that is something that you've experienced or need help with, we could help you to figure out what to say and do in those moments. A lot of the times it's as simple as like, oh, that is really interesting. I don't know why fish live in the ocean. Let's talk about it next time I see you. If you're going to have time the next time you see them. If you're not, then don't promise that you're going to talk about it next time. Or, maybe we can find a book about that we can read next week, and then you bring in an article about it the next week when you do your reading. It's a good point. Extrinsic motivation. So this is the advantage and why a lot of us have been extrinsically motivated in our lifetime, and why a lot of us lean towards this when working with students, is that it's really quick. It gets you what you want from the child a lot faster than getting them intrinsically motivated. And it typically involves relatively little effort or preparation. So if I don't know a kid and I have no lesson planned and someone tells me I have to sit down with them for 15 minutes, the easiest thing to do is to be like, oh, I think I have a piece of candy in my bag. Like, we're going to read for 5 minutes, and if we read for 5 minutes, you get a piece of candy, and then we're going to go through this, and if you do that, then you get free time. And all of a sudden, they're on task because they want candy and they want free time. But do they really care about what they're learning? Probably not. So it is quick. It does get what you want in a fast, little to no effort way. But as we're learning about intrinsic knowledge, it's not necessarily what we want for our kids, because it's not necessarily going to carry outside of that lesson. Which is what it says there in the disadvantages. It's just not long term, and we're looking to build holistic children that can eventually be launched into the world as successful, God-fearing, productive kingdom builders. And so constantly relying on intrinsic motivation is just not going to get us there. So if it happens, or you need to quickly rely on it, it's not that big of a deal, but it's when you're doing it regularly and it's your first go-to to extrinsically motivate. And so just constantly be thinking about that. Maybe reflect every time you have a tutoring session. How was I motivating the student? How was the student motivated? And if you're working with older students, so that would probably only be Schiller and tutoring center people. But if you're working with older students, you can ask them too. You can ask them questions to find out how they're learning. You can even make them aware of this. You could teach them about intrinsic motivation and extrinsic. Even some little ones, probably, if you change your language, you can kind of explain to them that you want them to know for a practical reason. You don't want them to just want the candy. And so that takes getting to know your student and explaining it, but don't think that this is above their head. It's good for them to know. I knew when I was little that I like to learn because I like to learn. And I think it's because my mom talked to me about that. I knew that not every kid wanted to go home and open up a book and read for a couple of hours. I knew that when I was reading National Geographic in high school for fun, I wasn't that normal. Okay, so this is similar, but this is the types of learners that go along with that. And so there are deep learners, which is what we're hoping to create in our students. We don't want, sorry it's so small, can everybody read that? Mm-hmm. Kind of. Yeah, we want them to be intrinsically motivated for life. And intrinsic motivation, something I haven't mentioned yet, is that that's what it takes to master something fully. You can know how to do something, but it doesn't mean that you have it mastered. I was talking to my friend who teaches high school math, and he's AP Calc, I believe, so like 11th and 12th graders for the most part in AP Calc. And he said everyone comes into the room having gotten a certain grade in the prior year because they had to in order to get into the class. And then as the class goes on, like half of the class does really well and half of the class struggles a ton. And generally, the ones that are struggling are the ones that have memorized formulas and have learned how to plug in numbers. And the ones that aren't struggling are the ones that have learned the why and have invested the time into understanding why that formula works. And it's the same at the kindergarten level. If your kid just knows how to do something because they've practiced the routine of it, which is incredibly important, but if that's all that they've done and they haven't learned why that information is significant or how it fits into the larger picture of math. Sorry, I keep using math as an example. I think kids are typically less motivated in math, and that might be why. But like that's not our goal. We want deep learners. We don't want people to know just the surface information. You want them to know a little bit more of why it's happening. That's kind of what we're doing today. I could just teach you things to say to kids, which we're gonna do some writing out of things that you can say, practical words that you can use. But that's not gonna mean as much as you looking at the kid and kind of understanding where they're coming from and being able to come up with those words and phrases yourself, right? If you just know the surface level, it's easier to forget that in a couple of weeks. But if you understand the why, that's when you're a deep learner. Strategic learners, this is where I think a lot of students find themselves, that they're motivated by rewards. These are kids that study really, really hard for 2 days before a test, and then a week after the test, don't remember anything. This was me in biology in high school. I hated biology. I didn't think that it was practical to my life. Now maybe my mind would change. But I studied for tests so that I could get an A, and then I couldn't tell you any of that information today. I got an A in the class, and that was my goal. I was strategically learning. I even, to the point where like I started to learn where my teacher took questions from in the book, and that's what I studied. I didn't read the whole chapter. I read like the one part that I knew he cared about. Yeah, it gets you an A, but does it help you? The point of me taking biology in high school probably wasn't just so I got an A. It was probably so that I could build on that information later, which I guess I should say I did learn, because then when I was forced to take more biology classes at Pitt, I had double the studying that other people had to do because I didn't know any of the basic stuff. So again, something we want to avoid in our students. They might learn a game well enough that they can kind of trick you into thinking that they know it. So you should make sure that they truly do understand what they're doing. If I say 2 plus 2 and they say it equals 4, but then I put pieces in front of them and they don't know how to manipulate them into 2 groups of 2 and 1 group of 4, do they really understand 2 plus 2? No, they just know how to regurgitate the information. And then surface learners, it's similar, but these are kids that like feel like they can't have success. And so they're giving up the second that they don't know. And this is where, as a teacher, you want to learn to scaffold, which is something that in the trainings later today you're going to learn how to do when you're working with the actual materials that you'll be working with in the classroom. But this is teaching them how to take baby steps so that they get to where they need to go. Because they might not be able to just pick up a book and read it and learn the information like some kids can do. They might need baby steps to get to that information. And so being an intrinsic learner for them almost takes more work and more effort. They have to learn how to scaffold even for themselves. And at the early age, that means having a teacher that scaffolds that they can later model on. So an example of this might be you want a student interested in a book, but they are not a fluent reader at all, and they see how many words are on the page, and they immediately don't want to read the book. Like, there's no way I'm reading that book. I can't read that book. Okay, so if you want them to read the book, maybe it means having the book with you and there's pictures in it, and you take them through the book, and they can kind of tell you the story based on the pictures. And now all of a sudden they're invested in the content, and they feel like they can do it. And so that's where they're at now, and maybe by the end of the year they are picking up that book and they're reading the words in the book. So you're teaching them to not be turned off by material and information because it seems impossible to them. It might be not doable right in this moment, but there's a way that we can get you there, is kind of my mindset for that. And honestly, I guess the biology example could probably work for that too. I think I tried to drop the class at Pitt, and then my advisor was like, no, you have to take it. And I was like, okay, now I need to figure out like how I can be successful. Okay, so we want intrinsic motivation, right? This is kind of the process that a brain might sort of go through when it's being intrinsically motivated. I'll use my National Geographic love as an example for this, because I don't read National Geographic front to back every single month. I am very selective in what I choose to invest my time in National Geographic. So I'm given the opportunity, my National Geographic comes in the mail, and I have to determine if it's worth my evening to read it or not. Is this one interesting enough to me? And so I look at the main thing on the cover, and then I look at all of the mini stories. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm kind of interested in, I don't know. I think the one I just got it was the history one. It had something about like Rome, and clearly I wasn't interested. I don't know, I don't even know. It was like finances in Rome, and I was like, pass. Wasn't interesting. So I'm not to me, that is not worth learning. But then, another one came, and it was about genius, and how somebody is determined to be a genius. And I was like, oh, I immediately picked it up and decided that it was worth my evening to read about it. So to me, it was interesting. I'm ready to be intrinsically motivated to read this National Geographic about genius. So if not, it goes away. And if it is interesting, then you go into the next thing. Then it has to be stimulating, and I have to have some kind of control over it. So if you're telling me that I have to spend 5 hours reading the National Geographic about genius, I'm going to say pass. I probably only have 30 minutes to invest in it. To me, it's worth investing 30 minutes in. And it's stimulating to me. I open it, there's pictures, there's captions, it's the right length, it's not the whole entire book, it's just a couple of pages. Is it doable, and do I have some level of control over it? If you think about our students, if you put a 10-page packet, every lesson you're going to do for the year in front of them, they're immediately going to be like, yeah, no, that's too much. But if you put one little bit in front of them, okay, I can do that. It's enough. It's enough that it might be challenging, but it's doable. And then what comes into that too is making it interesting for them. Are you stimulating the things that they like? Are you making them want to do it? And that's where the example too of football, your student that liked football, if you all of a sudden are using little mini footballs instead of, I don't know, soccer balls, if they don't like soccer in the problem, they're going to be more invested. So learning your student, we'll talk more about that, and changing material to make it so that they can be intrinsically motivated to learn it. Yes?
I was just thinking, that's the way God deals with us.
Right.
Because all too often, there are certain paths He wants you to go on, and you go, oh, I can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
And then He kind of comes at you and says, I'm going to show you this. Oh, okay. And then He wears you down to the point where you say, okay, I give up, I will do this. And then you realize how good it was.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way God works with us. So I think it just kind of struck me that it's the kindness of God, how He wants us to be intrinsically motivated.
Called to make disciples that make disciples, right? But we're not doing it in the same way. And the Lord has put different ways of scaffolding us to get to where He wants us to go. Baby steps along the way. He's made it doable. It's challenging, but also doable. Usually there's some level of interest for us. He's working with our gifts. It's so true, yeah.
What's your whole idea of the packet? I mean, if God gave me the whole packet and said, this is what your life is going to be like, I would have said, I've counted the cost, but this is just too costly. But the fact that He just illuminates the next step is enough for me. And I think that's the way we have to help our students to see it. It's just this one little step, make this little baby step, and it'll get you to where you need to go.
Yeah, and the cool thing is every time you go into the classroom, you should be relying on the Holy Spirit to be with you when you go in. And then you have the Holy Spirit in you. It's the character of God who has mastered all of these things and created them. And so He's all of a sudden living inside of you. So even if you don't remember anything from this training, you call on the Holy Spirit, He's going to show you how to respond to students in the moment. Maybe you haven't taken time to get to know the student, but you're sitting there with them one-on-one, and you're asking the Holy Spirit to give you the Lord's eyes for that student. And so your lesson is being directed accordingly. I don't know where my math people are, but I know Ben was talking about that today too. Where are we at? I think we probably covered. The challenge, which is a real challenge. It is like, you should be praying before you go in. You shouldn't be trying to go in on your own strength. You should be asking the student questions to get to know them. It is gonna take time. It's gonna take patience. Again, the example of the Lord, think of how patient He has to be with us to get us to that end goal. There's so many times when we try to go off track, and the students are going to do that. You need to be patient with them. You need to be not relying on your own strength and getting to know them and being well prepared when you walk in. And so maybe being well prepared for one person means looking at the stuff the night before. For another person who's been volunteering for a while, it might just mean like getting there 5 minutes early, being able to take a few deep breaths, pray for a minute, and quickly glance over the lesson. It's going to look different for everybody, but you need to figure out what it's going to take for you as a tutor to come well prepared for that student. Okay, so here we're going to get into the practical ways of doing this. The first one is to have energy and enthusiasm, because this is, I think, one of the easiest ones. We've all had somebody standing in front of us that was not energetic or enthusiastic, maybe had a monotone voice and didn't care about what they were teaching. And we didn't care what they were teaching about either. We didn't want to be there. Don't be that person for your students, because they're not going to want to come, and then you're not going to want to come, and no one's going to learn anything, and it's going to be a waste of precious time. So this is something that even if you're having a bad day, like learning to put something aside so that you can be present with that student. And energy and enthusiasm doesn't have to be the same for everybody. I am not like, I can't speak super loud and get cheerful. My voice will crack if I try to like sing a high-pitched song for the kid. But that doesn't mean that I don't care about what I'm learning and I can't impart that to my students. It's something that you have to try to do, and you have to see if how you're portraying your enthusiasm is being received by the student. Because maybe when you're with adults, people can feel that you're passionate, and you're realizing that like the kid isn't really feeling it. So maybe you do kind of have to adjust the way that you show it to them. Does anyone have any thoughts on this one, or times when they knew that they lost their kid because they were tired? I did. I feel like when I was teaching preschool, this was every single day. Like by the end of the day, you were like, well, they're not listening anymore. I'm tired. I need a nap. And it's very clear in all of their learning. Like start the day really strong. All the kids are there with you, and then by the end. Anyway, and okay. I like this part. Bringing your personal interest into the tutoring lesson helps you with this and helps motivate the student. You're not supposed to pretend to be somebody when you're sitting across from them. Be yourself. Maybe you've never tutored before and you're hesitant to tutor because you're like, I'm not a teacher. Okay, but God has called you to tutor right now. He wants you there, so just be yourself in the tutoring session. And the student is going to know if you're being yourself or not. There's something called authentic learning and authentic teaching. And I know there's not a lot of research on it now, but Pitt's Office of Child Development is doing a bunch of research on what it means to be an authentic teacher. And what it comes down to, like there's a lot of big fancy words and papers on it, but what it comes down to is like, are you being yourself in front of people? Are you standing there like super formal? Not that you shouldn't be formal to an extent, but super formal and rigid, and none of your own experiences are sitting with you at the table. No, because that doesn't feel real, and you're not going to get trust from your students. They want to see who you are, and they want to get to know you. And so it also doesn't mean sharing everything about your personal life. I think that we all are aware of that. But finding that balance of like, oh, maybe I should mention to them that I have a daughter who's in college and is interested in what they're interested in. Or maybe it does mean talking about where you grew up or how you were in school. Maybe you didn't like math, and it would be good for them to hear that. You should share those things. And it's gonna make them way more engaged if they know a little bit about you than if they know nothing. And then getting to know your students. This is the number one most important thing with behavior management. If you don't have a relationship with your student, then you're not gonna be able to do all of the steps that people are gonna tell you to do to keep your students' behaviors in check. So people can tell you, give you advice on how to manage behaviors, but if that student doesn't like you at all, and you don't know anything about them, and they know that you don't know anything about them, then all of that advice doesn't really mean very much. Because if you're positively reinforcing them, but they don't care to have your positive reinforcement, then it might not work. And so the first thing that you should do on the day that you walk into the classroom or you walk into tutoring center is to get to know the students that you're working with, and genuinely care about who they are as a human being. Does anyone have any advice for how to do this or things they've done in the past? Mr. Rich?
I'm dealing with kindergarten, but I have a sheet of paper and I write down their name, find out something about their families, always find out their birthday, if they have any pets, brothers and sisters. And then I actually have a list of accomplishments as we go through, so that if something creates a problem, say, well, remember back when you did this. And if, particularly talking about their family is usually pretty good. Some of the kids, of course, don't want to talk about their family because it's not good. But the majority of them, particularly if they have brothers and sisters, love it.
And so then I'll follow up with that on, if you do that sheet of paper, use the sheet of paper. If you're gonna do it, don't ignore it, because they remember that you filled it out. And then when you ask them in 2 weeks, if they like to dance, they're gonna be like, yeah, I wrote it on the paper. Apparently you didn't read the paper. And that sounds like a very organized way of doing it. I know myself, and I would take all of the papers, and then I would probably lose all of the papers, or they would be like in my backpack, and I'd be like sifting through trying to find that kid's
So the
paper.
advantage on that is each one has a folder. So you
Oh,
can
yeah,
just
you
print
could
the folder.
plop it in.
And that way,
Oh, that's the
because
case
it's
of
so easy to
things there, too.
forget.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great idea. So that's a practical way to do it.
One thing I would do is, if the kid is more talkative, like just taking them to the table and then working with them on the way there. If they're very talkative, they would talk about things that they like, and you build off that. Base your questions to get to know them off that. And then when you get to the table, like whenever you're working with them, be like, oh, I know you like this, and kind of make it in with the plan. But if they're a little more shy, I would just keep like asking them questions, and then one thing would spark, and then they would open up,
Mhm.
and then just keep going off that.
Yeah, that's good advice too. Yeah.
Yeah, another way to get them to talk about their family is say, hey, let's draw your family tree. And then
That's good.
I draw my family tree, show them my mother, my dad, and my brother and sister, and then they put their family tree together. So you get to know whether they have brothers, sisters, older, younger, and it kind of gives you a snapshot of what's in their home, which is, yeah, and that seems to work sometimes.
Yeah, that's a great tool too. And if you feel like you don't have time to do this, I would say just talk to your program leader about like when there is time to get to know students. Because the reality is, in some of the schools, like we do have to get to work and we have things that we need to accomplish. We can't spend the whole entire time just talking about their family and not reading and not doing math. So figuring out the balance of like, how do I make sure I efficiently get to know them? Other advice is to have eye contact and actually be listening. It's so easy, I think, for a kid to be telling you a story and like, they don't really know how to tell a story yet, so you don't really even know what they're talking about, but they're passionate, and you heard a couple of names, and like maybe they went to a pumpkin patch, you don't really know what they're trying to say. And so you've started to get your materials together, and they're still talking about something. And you're doing this, and you're like, yeah. They know that you're not listening. Maybe that time they don't know, but they're eventually gonna realize that you're not actually listening. You should have eye contact with them. You should be trying to understand what they're saying, or try to figure out why they want to tell you that story, because for some reason that story is important for them and they want you to know. So try to figure out what they mean about the pumpkin patch, and just pause for a second and listen, because the lesson will happen. You'll get the materials ready. It's more important to care about the kid in front of you. And again, you might think that they don't notice, but they notice. I feel like there are multiple times at summer day camp, and I feel like kids said this to me too, where they'd be like, "You're not listening." Or like, "I'm trying to tell you something," and they're looking at you as you're like putting things up in the cupboard, and you're like, "Oh, I wasn't listening," and they just called me out for it. And just pause your body, take a few deep breaths. You'll get the things that you need to get done, and listen to the kid talk about something that nobody knows what they're talking about. But listen. Okay, tell why. So everybody, including us, wants to know why you're learning something, right? And so maybe you don't have an easy answer when the kid goes, "Well, why do I have to know what 2 + 2 is? But why?" But take time to try to explain it to them, even if it's as simple as, like, you're gonna learn more in the next few years, and you need to know this so that you can do that. And for some kids that will be enough, and for some kids that won't be. But when they ask those questions, don't ignore them, because they're not gonna be as intrinsically motivated if they have no idea why they have to know something. They need to have some level of investment. So keep trying to answer the question until you answer it in a way that satisfies them enough that they're like, "Okay, I get this. I can put the work in to do it." Student engagement, we've already kind of been talking about this, but you don't want to always be giving them an answer. You want them to be able to engage with the material and come up with the answer on their own to some capacity. And this has a lot to do with scaffolding. I keep using that word. I know in math training today you'll learn more about that, and you'll naturally learn about it in your literacy training too. But you're helping students get to an answer, but ultimately get to the answer on their own. So sometimes you're doing something one-on-one with them, like maybe you model it for them first, then you're doing it with them, but you want them to feel a part of it. And so when you're modeling it for them, they should know that there's going to be a chance for them to do it and them to succeed in it later. And then when they are doing it and succeeding in it, you're not just telling them the answer. You might be like guiding them up to the answer so much that there is no chance that they can't say the right answer, but they need to be the one that says the right answer. They're not going to feel engaged if it's constantly just you stepping in for them. And that goes into cooperatively working with them. So again, if you know that they're not at a point where they can get 2 + 2 = 4 on their own, then you just have the right materials with you, and you'll be set up by your program leader to have them. You have the right materials with you so that you can get them to that answer together, working with them. But they have to be engaged with it. It can't just all be you spitting information at them, which is what I'm doing to you right now, but they're little. Thank you. Again, this kind of goes with scaffolding too, setting realistic goals for them. Maybe you've been working on 2 + 2 = 4 for 5 weeks, so to you, they should know it and they should get it. And you're like, we're just going to try it and see if they can do it on their own. But you know that they didn't do it on their own last week. And so if you just decide on your own that you think you just want to see if they can do it, then you might be setting them up to fail in that moment. Set them up to succeed. Don't make them do it completely independently until you know that they're ready to do it completely independently. Because you want them to learn to feel success when they're putting hard work in, and that turns them into an intrinsic learner. If you failed every time you tried to teach yourself something, then you're no longer going to be intrinsically motivated to do it. That's me with IKEA furniture. I'm not interested in building IKEA furniture because I've built things that were incorrect multiple times. If I would have had somebody doing it with me, the first time maybe I just watched somebody build it, and the second time somebody built it with me. The third time I'd probably be like, okay, I can go buy this, I can do it on my own. I know I can get there, but that hasn't been the case. I tried to do it the first time by myself and I failed. And so now I'm not interested. Somebody else can do it for me. I'll pay somebody to build my IKEA furniture for me. And that's like what we do to kids sometimes. We give them all of the pieces that look like a jumbled mess and make absolutely no sense, and we tell them to do it on their own. And then guess what? Next time, they're not gonna be motivated to do it on their own because they knew they couldn't do it last time. So just give them the baby steps. Do it for them the first time, do it with them the second time, and then let them do it. Has anyone heard I do, we do, you do? Yeah, has anybody not heard that phrase before? I do, we do, you do. I say that in my head a lot of the time if I'm with someone that's struggling. Because you want to go quick with them, because our culture is fast and quick paced, and maybe you've never struggled with learning, so for you it should happen really quickly. But you have to slow down. Like, just do it for them the first time so they can see it. And maybe you have to do it for them multiple times. And then a lot of the times you're in that we do for a really long time. You're not just modeling it for them, but you're also not asking them to do it completely by themselves. It's back and forth. You're filling in where you need to fill in to get them to where you want them to go. And that's the easiest way of hearing it that I've heard. There's a lot of different phrasings for that same thing, but I do, we do, you do has been the one that's stuck in my head personally. Okay, praise. So praise is interesting because I think you could kind of think it's extrinsic, and it probably could become extrinsic, but we want praise that motivates intrinsic learning. So when they're having success because of something that they've done, then you should praise it. I see you're working so hard and we got to the answer. Like, this was difficult and we worked really hard and we got there. That's good praise. Saying good job every time they get the answer right is going to start to function as extrinsic motivation. They're going to want to get the right answer so that you say good job. So you're praising in a way that is motivating them to continue to do those hard-working things that get you to an end goal. Does that make sense? Where it could kind of go in both directions, so you should be careful. This has to do with like the growth mindset type of thing too. If you've heard of that in the schools, that kind of plays into this. And if you haven't heard of growth mindset, find me at some point today and we can talk about what I mean when I say that. Because I'm probably short on time. We've sort of touched on this. You want to make sure that the student has as much control over their learning as they can. Sometimes you can't give them a ton of control, and so you kind of have to fabricate it. You might have 2 games that you know they have to play both before you leave, so you just say, which one do you want to play first? Or maybe you have no control, and so you're trying to find a way to give them control, and so you have 2 pencils, and you're like, which pencil do you want? Well, you gave them control to some capacity. That feels a lot better than just being told what to do for an entire hour. Okay, and then I think we're out of time, but I do have this worksheet that you can take with you. I call them motivation cues. And these are like different ways that you can motivate a student. So making something a novelty, surprise, challenge, feedback. And then I gave examples of things to say, but these examples are for like older learners. So I left a blank next to it. Think about the age that you're working with and yourself, and write the phrase that you can say. And I would take time to do this before you go to program. Like, think through what words you want to use to get them motivated in this way. If I give you a phrase, it's going to be what I would say, and it's not going to be what you would say, so it's going to feel awkward for you to say it. So it is important that you think about what sounds natural to you, and that plays into being an authentic teacher also.